So Elizabeth, you are a teacher out in California. How long have you been a teacher?
I've been a teacher for 25 years.
25 years. And what does teaching mean to you?
Well, it's the future, right? I always joke around with the kids. I teach junior high, so it's a special calling. You have to be cut out for it. But I always tell the kids, well, at least we spend all day laughing because they love to laugh. So we're always laughing and goofing around. But teaching the kids everything they need to strike out into the future, achieve their own dreams and goals, reach the highest potential that they have, empowering them with knowledge.
Yeah.
Very fun job.
Well, it sounds like you have a lot of passion for teaching. You've been doing it for a long time, and your case has been making headlines. You are suing, along with another teacher, the leaders at the Escondido Union School District and also the California Board of Education. At the center of this case is the claim and the policy that you were told to lie to parents about kids' gender identity. And I know I'm oversimplifying sort of a complicated scenario, but can you take us through, Elizabeth, what sort of brought you to this place of formulating this lawsuit?
Well, it's been brewing in the background for some time, a couple of years now. The policy was rolled out. But personally, I had never had a child in my classroom that asked me to withhold information from their parents. That just occurred this year. So at first, I was just thoughtful and quiet about it. And then after there were a whole number of these young girls who were kind of getting interested in this new thing, and they were asking me, I'd like to be called this, but please don't tell my parents. I was approached by a number of students, and I realized quickly that I was in a really rough space because I keep in regular contact with parents. I like to keep them up to date on any concerns that I have, whether they're academic or behavior or social, emotional. But I knew that teachers were getting in trouble for speaking out. So I went online and I was thinking, okay, maybe I need some help. So I sent out an email form to the Thomas More Society. And within 2 days, I got a phone call from this gentleman right here.
Paul, I want to come to you in a second because I want to get your legal take on all of this. But Elizabeth, you mentioned teachers getting in trouble for speaking out. This purported policy on the books encouraging telling teachers to lie to parents about their kids' gender identity. Were there teachers, and if so, tell us whatever you can, who were being punished actively for violating that policy?
Yes, we were told in meetings that we had to follow the policy strictly. We were told to say certain things, and we were told to withhold information from parents. And one teacher that works with me at my school asked a lot of questions about the policy. She spoke to her students about it, also questioning whether it was the right thing to do. She held a class discussion. And shortly after that, she was called into the office and she was reprimanded in writing by our principal and the assistant principal. Other teachers signed on and said that this particular teacher did that with an intention to harm others, which I do not believe was the case at all. So I got pretty scared because I thought, they're going to write you up. That goes in your file and you're supposedly violating, the rules of your contract.
Right. That's a serious infraction potentially if it's going in your file and you're, as you said, violating the rules of your contract because these are the policies that were being set in place. Paul, I have to go to you for a minute on this because, as a journalist, I'm thinking, okay, I'm hearing two things go on right now. Teachers are being purportedly told that they have to lie to parents, right? You have that policy and you have teacher rights. But then I think about the parents, and I know these are two different issues, but they're related. The parents who are sending their kids to a public school and suddenly have to worry that perhaps that school might be lying to them and taking on the role of parent in this strange way. What do you make of that as an attorney legally, both of those paradigms?
Yeah, those are two different constitutional grounds for this policy being challenged. I mean, basically, there's the parental rights aspect and there's the First Amendment rights of teachers. And both of them are at issue in our case. We're representing teachers, but again, they're severely undermining the rights of parents because they're leaving them in the dark. They're basically the new paradigm that they're adopting is that they know what's best for these kids, and parents are presumptively people who have no legitimate need to know this information. Parents, they just assume, are going to be harmful or unsupportive of the children. So it's a blatant violation of one of the most basic and fundamental rights that our nation has recognized from its inception, which is the fundamental right of parents to raise their own children without government interference. And so that's very much at issue here. But the First Amendment rights of teachers is what we're focusing on. That's what our claims are based on. It's free speech and free exercise of religion. And those are very strong claims that we believe will ultimately prevail. And we're seeking a preliminary injunction, and the judge will hear that motion on June 26th.
June 26th. So that is coming down the pipeline. And Paul, I'm going to come back to you in a minute on some of the other elements of the case itself. But Elizabeth, one of the things I've seen you speak out on, and it's really interesting because a lot of times when we talk about these cases, we're talking about, what Paul just spoke about, which is incredibly important: First Amendment rights for teachers, free speech, the ability to practice your faith. And you did seek out an accommodation from what I understand as well. And that didn't quite go well before you went this route. And you can speak to that in a moment. But when you look at this, you've talked about kids and deceit and how as a teacher, you don't want to teach kids that it's okay to lie. And I thought that was a really interesting element of this case. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Sure. Well, the heart of a teacher is you always want to provide the best example of, conduct and making positive choices and being a responsible individual, right? And I think that most people from any walk of life would agree that honesty is a key principle that we just do not violate. And we certainly don't want to model that for our children, because if a child is in turmoil, if a child is hurting, if a child has got those deep questions tearing at their heart, we don't want them to say, well, you're not strong enough to face this thing with honesty. I think openness, transparency, letting the light in is what is going to help heal that broken heart that the child might have, all that inner turmoil. And I think that educators need to provide the support and resources to a family with a child going through a crisis, not cut the parents out, but bring the parents in and help the child learn the value of honesty and the value of openness. Now, if the child's not ready to be open with their parents, to come out with their parents, okay, that can be respected. But confidential support from a counselor is what we provide. We don't go further. Watchful waiting is the safest approach. We don't want to drive a wedge, teach the child to hide and manipulate others. That's not healthy.
Well, and these have been, by the way, I think it is interesting because for years, these debates have gone on different issues, on, condoms in schools. There's 15 different issues that people have fought about when it comes to parental rights. Should parents be notified of these things that go on in schools? This actually feels like the manifestation of parents' worst nightmare. in a lot of ways, right? This is sort of the thing that people have warned about for quite a long time. And so I have to ask you, Elizabeth, what are you hearing and what have you heard since this policy, because the policy's been on the books now for a couple of years, has been active? What have you heard from parents about this?
Well, what I've heard from parents that I've contact with is that by and large, parents do not know. Now, why do parents not know? Because the school district where I work did not notify the parents. They did accept any public comment. They did not even hold a public meeting about it. It was implemented quickly and quietly. It was to affect only teachers. It does not affect our nurses. It does not affect our office workers. It does not affect our nutrition staff. It does not affect administrators. Only teachers are being told to follow the policy, and only teachers are being disciplined for not following it.
You know, Paul, when I look at this case, I think, okay, this is a unique case. We haven't quite, as far as I know, had a case like this before. It's obviously a very specific case. There are two teachers here involved in it, but what do you see as the potential ramifications of this case, depending on what way it goes? It seems like it could be a pretty big deal in the end.
Well, there's pretty significant ramifications. There has been one similar case where the district court in Kansas struck down a similar policy. And I think the case settled, and I don't think it went on appeal. So it's very important that we establish strong precedent in the Court of Appeal or possibly the U.S. Supreme Court so we could shut this down, because this is happening all over the country. And it's very, these policies are proliferating. They're very common in California, but in many, many other states. And they're very dangerous. I mean, this is not a liberal conservative issue. Even experts in the LGBT community have come out and said, look, they're obviously pro transitioning, but they think it's very harmful for a child to do this without their parents' knowledge or consent, or leaving the parents in the dark. So this is, even experts on the other side of this issue think this is a dangerous policy. So why they're spreading and how, remains to be fully seen in this, and we'll determine that as discovery proceeds. But the bottom line is, this is a very dangerous policy. These kids obviously have major issues besides gender confusion. The statistics say of the overwhelming majority, I think almost 90%, have other serious psychiatric issues that need to be addressed. And leaving parents out of the picture is just going to cause more harm. So I think it has major ramifications, and we're hoping and praying and working hard to make sure that this policy is enjoined, and hopefully that would set some precedent nationwide.
I've mentioned this in a number of interviews, and I'm going to keep saying it because I think it's important to say, we just had a Supreme Court case last year, a victory for a coach who was not able to pray on the 50-yard line. Of course, he won that case for fear that students would be impacted by voluntarily joining him in that prayer. And of course, that wasn't in California, but here we are having this conversation about whether or not kids should be able to go behind their parents' backs and lie, and that the teachers should help them. I mean, it's so strange when you look at the different issues and you try to figure out, how did we get here? Now, as we come to a close here, Elizabeth, I just wanted to ask you, if you had in front of you people who were critics or were saying, maybe hateful things towards you, or questioning why you're doing this, what would you say to those people?
Well, I would probably say that I think we both are trying to look out for our youth. I think we're both seeking, the good for kids. But as I said a little earlier when we chatted, we're violating a fundamental moral precept here, which St. Paul laid out in Romans chapter 3, verse 8, where you can't achieve a good end through evil means. everybody agrees that lying is not a moral thing. It's not a good thing. We certainly don't want to teach and model that to our children as a coping strategy, and children who have such deep needs that, as Paul said, need to be addressed. And we don't want them to think that lying is the answer. We want them to, teach them how to cope with a crisis in a healthy way. And what would I say to those people who are approaching it differently? Wow, that's a good question. I would just say, the empirical data shows that the safest approach, the least harmful way to approach this is through watchful waiting. The vast majority of kids who go through a phase of questioning or struggle inside, they work it out over time. There's no rush. We shouldn't be rushing these kids down the path and taking them by the hand to the next level of transition, which is medical. And that is why I stood up, because I have some children in my classrooms who are experimenting with this. And if I don't say anything, what will occur is they will be led to the next phase, medical transition, which includes taking, kids should not be harming their healthy bodies.
It's life altering and irreversible many times, depending on what is done. And that has been just, for people who are watching or listening to this, one of the biggest struggles in this discussion is that is not always talked about, right? That some of these medical interventions are not reversible and they're permanent. And it's a decision made on a child who is young, a teenager even, and hasn't fully developed. And I don't want to speak for you, but I think to your point, that's what you're speaking about here. Paul, final question to you. And we sort of talked about this before, but I want to just give you a chance to sort of land the plane on it. What do you hope to see happen in this case?
Well, first and foremost, we want Elizabeth and Lori to be able to continue working and serving these students as they have so exceptionally well for decades. We want them to continue doing that without being threatened to either comply with an illegal policy and violate their faith or lose their job. So our first goal for them is to get them back in the classroom without being forced to violate their faith. But more broadly, I think Elizabeth and Lori and us helping would like to see this policy, removed from the books, and policies like this across the country removed from the books, because they're illegal, they're harmful, and that's what we're working towards.
Well, I want to thank you both for taking the time today to come on, break this down, explain it to us. We would love to have you back as the case unfolds.
Our pleasure. Thanks for having us.